Dear listener, welcome to this calm and unhurried journey through history here on the Histovale channel. We sincerely hope you are finding full rest in this late hour of the night. Now, let us enter that quiet chapter of history.
The year 1850 in California was a symphony of chaos, but it was a chaos played out at a monotonous, repetitive tempo. The vastness of the Sierras absorbed the noise of 100,000 desperate men, leaving behind only the rhythmic, endless scraping of shovels against gravel, the sigh of the rocker boxes, and the cold, unceasing rush of the thaw-fed streams. This was the era of the gold rush, a moment of loud, vulgar ambition. Yet, for those who lived it, it was often a quiet, dusty, and profoundly lonely existence. The historical record tends to focus on the spectacular, the nuggets, the fortunes, the violent confrontations. Our story, however, must turn its gaze to the vast, forgotten middle ground, the years of negligible returns, the endless days spent bending over freezing water, the slow wearing down of hope. It is within this immense historical silence that true secrets are often preserved. Our point of entry is not a dazzling gold deposit, but a humble artifact, the Journal of Tobias Halloway. Tobias Halloway was, by all conventional measures, a failure. He arrived in California in the spring of 1850, a printer by trade, possessing more intellectual curiosity than physical fortitude. He mined for 3 grueling years near the confluence of the Yuba and Feather rivers, a historically rich area that yielded nothing but exhaustion for Halloway. His journal, found decades later in a private collection of Californian ephemera, was cataloged not for its historical import, but merely for its exquisite early American binding. The journal itself is a physical embodiment of the era's sober disappointment. Bound in thick, sun-bleached cowhide, the pages bear the permanent creases of having been stored in a saddlebag, often exposed to dust and damp. The ink is thin, often running slightly where sweat or stream water had touched the page, lending the entire volume an air of gentle, quiet decay. It had been preserved in the most non-dramatic fashion possible, tucked into a cool, dark library shelf, surviving through benign neglect. The first 3/4 of the journal's entries are models of historical tedium, and thus perfect for our purpose. They catalog the minutiae of Halloway's mining existence, delivered in a looping, slightly fatigued hand. June 12, 1850. The sun was merciless. Cleaned the sluice twice for less than 5 pinches of dust. Ate hardtack and weak coffee. Old man Davies is coughing again. Another day of the cold water. July 3, 1850. Staked a new claim 30 yards upstream. The ground seems promising. The colors are deep red, promising ancient rock. Hours spent digging the channel. Found only rusted iron and gravel. The hope is a burden. August 19, 1851. The fever is through the camp again. Felt the chill myself. Read Plutarch by the fire, but my eyes are too tired to focus. Wrote a letter to Eliza. Did not mention the lack of gold. The lie of fortune is harder work than the digging. These entries are the steady, repetitive beat of the gold rush, the sound of history turning its wheels slowly. They paint a picture of quiet endurance, not of the fevered madness often depicted. Halloway was one of the many who found not fortune, but only the quiet, overwhelming reality of hard physical labor. The shift, when it finally occurs on page 197, is not a sudden burst of excitement, but a subtle, almost imperceptible drift into a different kind of obsession. The tone does not become excited. It becomes meditative, quieter, more intensely focused on observation rather than outcome. The entries begin to contain strange, non-commercial details. May 5, 1852. The dust today tasted of copper, not iron. The air carried a low hum after the storm. Observe the shadows of the western pine. They do not lengthen symmetrically here. Found the slate stone, polished, but strange to the touch. Felt a vibration in the granite. It is not water. June 1, 1852. Spent the day not panning, but listening. The current runs strong, but below the current, the rock has a voice. It speaks in frequencies, not gold. My claim is worthless, but my proximity is invaluable. Davy scoffed. Let him scoff. The focus shifts from the gleam of gold to the quiet gleam of intellectual anomaly. Halloway, the failed printer turned miner, was observing the world through a non-commercial lens. The most profound historical anomaly, however, was not in the handwriting, but within the binding itself. Between pages 210 and 211, where the binding threads were thickest, Dr. Alastair Finch, a contemporary researcher specializing in the geological folklore of the Sierras, found a tiny, tri-folded piece of vellum paper. It was not glued, merely tucked, almost as if it had been placed there by a hand seeking to preserve a secret without the effort of concealment. The note, written in an elegant foreign hand, not Halloway's, contained no language, but only a series of complex geometrical figures and symbols. It was a diagram, precise and meticulous, depicting the intersection of several lines marked telluric current axis and solar alignment zenith. Near the center of the vellum was a single, perfect sketch of an object, a compass, but one utterly unlike any instrument known to 19th century navigation. This instrument, clearly labeled with the faint foreign script, was the Obsidian Compass. The sketch showed a small, heavy base made of a dull, black volcanic glass, obsidian. It had no magnetic needle. Instead, its face contained a series of concentric circles marked with non-standard degrees, and in the center, a small suspended pendulum with a tiny crystalline tip. An accompanying legend, translated by Dr. Finch with great difficulty, as the script resembled 17th century German scientific writing, detailed the compass's function. It points not north, but to the Earth's own heart rhythm. It follows the metal's slow song, bypassing the magnet's common deception. The currents are all that matter. This note, tucked into the journal of a historically insignificant miner, represented a massive intellectual leap. It suggested a knowledge of non-magnetic methods for locating metallic ore, a concept far ahead of 1850 science, leaning instead toward the realms of alchemy, geomancy, or highly sophisticated indigenous knowledge of the Earth's electrical fields. Immediately following this note in his own hand, Halloway's journal contains a final detailed entry. September 7, 1852. He came at dusk. Not a miner, but a scholar. His coat was too fine for the mountains. He spoke of the obsidian. He did not ask for gold, but for my observations on the sub-harmonic drone of the riverbed. I gave him the note. In return, he gave me the knowledge. This is a search not for yellow metal, but for the purity of the source. My life has been wasted on dust. Now I shall seek the truth of the veins. I begin the ascent tomorrow toward the higher, silent peaks. The entry ends abruptly here. Tobias Halloway disappeared from the historical record entirely after this date. He left his worthless claim, his simple tools, and his journal, which became an archive footnote until Dr. Finch's quiet discovery. The quiet gleam was therefore not a glint of gold in a pan, but the soft, terrifying glow of a secret knowledge being transferred from a sophisticated European scholar to a disillusioned American printer. The first section of our investigation closes on this unsettling contrast. The loud, chaotic rush for shallow gold, obscuring the silent, deep quest for something far more esoteric and potentially disruptive. The truth of the veins, guided by an unmagnetic compass made of black volcanic glass. The stage is set for the pursuit of the scholar who arrived at dusk and the peculiar science he brought to the unsuspecting mountains. The entry in Tobias Halloway's journal, he came at dusk, not a miner, but a scholar. His coat was too fine for the mountains, serves as the quiet hinge upon which our narrative turns. It shifts the focus from the mundane struggle for dust to the esoteric pursuit of knowledge. The man in the fine coat, who spoke not of claims in ounces, but of the sub-harmonic drone of the riverbed, was not seeking wealth in the conventional sense. He was seeking purity. Through exhaustive archival work, tracking the paper trails of 1850s European scientific immigration, a field typically overlooked in the boisterous history of the gold rush, Dr. Finch identified the scholar as Professor Valerius Richter. Richter was, ostensibly, a professor of natural philosophy at a minor university in the German states. However, his true intellectual lineage was far older and deeper, tracing back to the 17th century European tradition of spiritual metallurgy, an academic discipline that sought to bridge chemistry, geology, and metaphysics. Richter was, in the truest and most quiet sense of the word, an alchemist of the Sierras. The term alchemist, in the context of the mid-19th century, carries a connotation of outdated folly. But to Richter, the alchemist's quest was profoundly modern. He was not trying to magically transmute lead into gold. He was attempting to understand the genesis of metal within the earth itself. He saw the element gold not as currency, but as the earth's most stable, perfected metallic state, a crystallization of specific energies flowing through the planet's crust. This pursuit of the first matter, or the philosophical gold, was a scientific quest disguised by antiquated terminology. The contrast between Richter and the men he encountered in California is the essential soothing rhythm of this part of the story. The miners were loud, their goals immediate, their tools brutal, shovels, picks, and gunpowder. They were engaged in a frenzy of extraction. Richter, conversely, was quiet, patient, and methodical. His tool was the sensitive Obsidian Compass. His goal was observation. He viewed the gold rush not as an opportunity for profit, but as a vast, involuntary geological experiment that confirmed his theories. The cacophony of the mining camps was, to him, merely noise that masked the subtle, crucial frequencies he sought to measure. Richter's journey to California was dictated not by the rumors of riches published in New York newspapers, but by the quiet logic of geology. His research, preserved in bound volumes of highly complex mathematical and chemical notations, focused on the geosynclinal theory, the idea that certain mountain ranges were formed from the deepest folds of the Earth's crust, making them ideal conduits for the Earth's most powerful telluric currents, the flow of electric current generated naturally below the Earth's surface. He had calculated, based on the unique deep-rooted formation of the Sierra Nevada batholith and its volcanic activity, that the Californian mountains were a prime location for the intersection of these telluric axes. He believed that the immense quantity of gold found there was merely a byproduct, a side effect of a much larger, more profound geological process. He was seeking the cause, while everyone around him scrabbled for the effect. His preparation was exhaustive. He did not bring mining equipment. Instead, his baggage consisted of a dozen highly sensitive pendulums made of crystalline quartz, bound copies of Agricola's De Re Metallurgica, 16th century treatise on mining, annotated heavily with modern chemical formulas, the Obsidian Compass protected in a velvet-lined case, reams of blank high-quality graph paper for charting his findings. Richter's clothing, the fine coat, was significant. It was not a sign of wealth in the miner's world, but a badge of academic insulation. It was a subtle physical barrier against the dust, the greed, and the philosophical contamination of the gold rush. He was an outsider, a silent observer in a laboratory the size of a mountain range. The science of the unseen current. The Obsidian Compass itself is central to Richter's methodology. Obsidian, being natural glass formed from rapidly cooled lava, is essentially amorphous and non-crystalline, possessing an electrical resistance far different from that of common magnetic metals. By crafting the compass from this volcanic material, Richter ensured that the instrument would be entirely immune to magnetic interference. The device operated on a principle Richter called resonance mapping. The crystalline pendulum at its center was highly sensitive to minute ground vibrations and, crucially, to the low-frequency electromagnetic radiation that Richter theorized emanated from deep metallic veins. He believed that the pendulum, like a musical instrument, would enter into sympathetic vibration or sub-harmonic drone when placed directly over a major accumulation of the Earth's metals, regardless of its magnetic signature. His goal was not to find a shallow placer deposit, but to map the master veins, the deep foundational structures that had fed all the surface gold. This was a 500-year project distilled into a few lonely years. This brings us back to Tobias Halloway. Why did Richter, the sophisticated European scholar, choose to share his secret with the exhausted, dusty printer? The journal provides the silent answer. Halloway's entry on May 5, 1852, reveals a sensory observation that transcended mere mining technique. The air carried a low hum after the storm, felt a vibration in the granite. It is not water. In that simple, solitary remark, Richter recognized a kindred spirit, a mind capable of quiet, non-utilitarian observation. Halloway was listening to the earth, not just digging it. He had subconsciously detected the sub-harmonic drone that Richter had traveled half the globe to measure scientifically. The meeting at dusk was not a commercial transaction, but a philosophical ordination. Richter gave Halloway the knowledge, the note, and the understanding of the Obsidian Compass, not for assistance in digging, but to preserve the scientific continuity. He needed someone else, even a single obscure miner, to bear witness to the existence of this secret science, should his own quest fail. The transfer was quiet, solemn, and weighted with the gravity of shared purpose. Halloway's final entry reflects this profound shift. I begin the ascent tomorrow, toward the higher, silent peaks. He left the noisy, low-lying riverbeds, the site of common ambition, and headed toward the silent heights of the Sierras, the domain of Richter's pure scientific quest. Professor Richter himself, having transferred his key concept, disappeared into the wilderness with the methodical efficiency of a man pursuing a long-planned goal. The only evidence of his later movement is a fragmented coded message found much later in a discarded German newspaper in San Francisco, which read simply, "Resonance confirmed. The source is colder than expected. The geometry holds true." The alchemist of the Sierras, the man who did not see gold, was engaged in an intellectual pursuit that dwarfed the ambitions of the entire gold rush. He was mapping the Earth's spiritual skeleton, guided by the silent, non-magnetic pull of the Obsidian Compass. His presence in the Sierras was a quiet, deep intellectual anomaly, a philosophical echo against the loud, temporary frenzy of the moment. We must now follow that echo into the higher mountains, where the strange science of the compass was finally put to the test. The ascent into the high Sierras in the mid-19th century was not merely a physical journey. It was a passage into a profound geological silence. Below, in the riverbeds, the chaos of the gold rush created a continuous, scraping dissonance, the sound of immediate, tangible greed. Above, however, where the air thinned and the great granite peaks rose toward the zenith, there was an absolute crystalline quietude. This was the laboratory chosen by Professor Valerius Richter and the silent sanctuary sought by Tobias Halloway. In this environment of pure stillness, the Obsidian Compass became the primary focus, and its function the sole rhythm of their days. This instrument, carved from the solidified volcanic trauma of the Earth, stood in direct philosophical opposition to the magnetic compasses used by every other explorer and prospector. The magnetic compass pointed towards a physical north, a direction defined by the Earth's iron core, a common, easily distracted force. The Obsidian Compass, however, was designed to tune into the telluric resonance, the subtle, natural electrical currents that flow along the planetary crust, often concentrated by geological fault lines and massive metallic deposits. The key to its function lay in its materials and its lack of magnetism. The obsidian base provided a neutral, high-resistance platform. The crystalline quartz pendulum, suspended on a single filament of spider silk, was the sensor. It was entirely inert to iron, but acutely sensitive to sub-harmonic vibrations, the ultra-low frequencies emitted by large, deep-seated concentrations of metals. Richter's methodology, patiently recorded in meticulous entries on his graph paper, was a study in profound patience. They did not prospect. They mapped the silence. Mapping the silence. The process of using the Obsidian Compass demanded a meditative stillness foreign to the gold rush ethos. Preparation. Finding a perfectly level granite slab, cooled by the night air, far from any running water that might disrupt the subtle ground vibrations. Observation. Setting the Obsidian Compass down, shielding it from the slightest breeze, and waiting, sometimes for hours, for the Earth's electromagnetic environment to stabilize. Measurement. Richter would use a magnifying lens to observe the crystalline pendulum. He wasn't looking for a swing, but for an almost imperceptible vibratory shimmer, a subtle blurring of the crystal's edge caused by the telluric currents passing through the stone beneath them. Recording. Each point of observation was recorded with 3 variables: altitude, solar zenith angle for geometric correction, and the precise amplitude of the sub-harmonic drone, a numerical value he derived from the pendulum's oscillation rate. Tobias Halloway, now fully committed to the philosophical quest, served as the meticulous recorder. He learned to distinguish the noise of the mountains, the distant crack of an ice sheet, the wind sighing through the pines, from the voice of the earth. He was no longer interested in the surface gleam. He was listening for the deep, cold song of the metal. This work was repetitive, slow, and visually unexciting, the perfect material for a sleep narrative. Imagine the days, hours of silent waiting, the hand moving only to transcribe a few numbers onto the graph paper, the only sound the faint scratching of the quill in the thin, high air. It was historical research conducted in situ, replacing frantic labor with meticulous scientific contemplation. The veins of the earth. Richter's theory was that gold, being the most perfected metal, was simply the visible crystallization of a much larger global metallic structure. He saw the gold veins as the arteries of the earth, carrying a flow of metallic energy. The Obsidian Compass was designed to trace these major conduits, ignoring the small, fractured capillaries that the common miner sought. The magnetic compass pointed towards a physical north, a direction defined by the Earth's iron core, a common, easily distracted force. The Obsidian Compass, however, was designed to tune into the telluric resonance, the subtle, natural electrical currents that flow along the planetary crust, often concentrated by geological fault lines and massive metallic deposits. The key to its function lay in its materials and its lack of magnetism. The obsidian base provided a neutral, high-resistance platform. The crystalline quartz pendulum, suspended on a single filament of spider silk, was the sensor. It was entirely inert to iron, but acutely sensitive to sub-harmonic vibrations, the ultra-low frequencies emitted by large, deep-seated concentrations of metals. Richter's methodology, patiently recorded in meticulous entries on his graph paper, was a study in profound patience. They did not prospect. They mapped the silence. Mapping the silence. The process of using the Obsidian Compass demanded a meditative stillness foreign to the gold rush ethos. Preparation. Finding a perfectly level granite slab, cooled by the night air, far from any running water that might disrupt the subtle ground vibrations. Observation. Setting the Obsidian Compass down, shielding it from the slightest breeze, and waiting, sometimes for hours, for the Earth's electromagnetic environment to stabilize. Measurement. Richter would use a magnifying lens to observe the crystalline pendulum. He wasn't looking for a swing, but for an almost imperceptible vibratory shimmer, a subtle blurring of the crystal's edge caused by the telluric currents passing through the stone beneath them. Recording. Each point of observation was recorded with 3 variables: altitude, solar zenith angle for geometric correction, and the precise amplitude of the sub-harmonic drone, a numerical value he derived from the pendulum's oscillation rate. Tobias Halloway, now fully committed to the philosophical quest, served as the meticulous recorder. He learned to distinguish the noise of the mountains, the distant crack of an ice sheet, the wind sighing through the pines, from the voice of the earth. He was no longer interested in the surface gleam. He was listening for the deep, cold song of the metal. This work was repetitive, slow, and visually unexciting, the perfect material for a sleep narrative. Imagine the days, hours of silent waiting, the hand moving only to transcribe a few numbers onto the graph paper, the only sound the faint scratching of the quill in the thin, high air. It was historical research conducted in situ, replacing frantic labor with meticulous scientific contemplation. The veins of the earth. Richter's theory was that gold, being the most perfected metal, was simply the visible crystallization of a much larger, global metallic structure. He saw the gold veins as the arteries of the earth, carrying a flow of metallic energy. The Obsidian Compass was designed to trace these major conduits, ignoring the small, fractured capillaries that the common miner sought. The charting revealed a terrifyingly coherent pattern. For weeks, they moved slowly higher into the mountains, following the directions indicated by the compass's strongest readings. The path led them away from any known mining settlement into a geological terrain characterized by massive, undisturbed formations of quartz and igneous rock. The compass, at its strongest readings, did not lead them to rich placer deposits. Instead, it led them to locations where the surface soil was entirely barren, but where the telluric currents intersected with astonishing power. These points were marked by unusual geological features, strange, almost perfectly circular depressions in the granite, or outcrops of rock that felt inexplicably warm or cold to the touch, entirely contradicting the ambient temperature. Halloway's journal entries from this period are brief, often focused solely on the compass's readings, confirming his intellectual conversion. October 21, 1852. High above the snow line. The air is so thin, thought becomes audible. The compass pendulum vibrated for 57 minutes at a steady 4.2 amplitude. This location has no visible ore, but the current is tremendous. We are standing on the source, not the shadow. The ultimate destination, reached in the late autumn, was a small high-altitude plateau, protected on three sides by sheer granite walls. Here, the Obsidian Compass did not vibrate. It went into a state of continuous, intense resonance. The crystalline pendulum seemed to glow faintly, blurring into a solid, singing disk of light. Richter confirmed their location against his theoretical maps. This point was the calculated intersection of three major metallic telluric current axes, a geological nexus that he believed was the core genesis point for all the gold found downstream. They dug briefly, not with the frenzied abandon of prospectors, but with the quiet precision of archaeologists. They found not nuggets, but layers of massive crystalline quartz laced with strange, non-oxidized mineral deposits. Analysis showed these deposits were an unstable pre-metallic form, a raw embryonic material that was slowly undergoing metallic perfection. They had found the Earth's metallic heart, the engine room of the mineral cycle. It was an infinitely valuable discovery, not for the gold it contained immediately, but for the knowledge of formation it represented. It was the scientific validation of the alchemical quest. The revelation was not one of riches, but one of power and terrifying understanding. Richter realized that this knowledge, the ability to locate the very source and understand the flow of the Earth's mineral energies, could not be shared with the chaotic, greedy world of 1852 California. The veins of the Earth were too powerful a secret for the men who had come only seeking dust. The compass had worked perfectly, and in its success lay the immediate necessity for absolute, profound silence. The next and most dangerous step was deciding how to permanently bury the truth they had so patiently unearthed. The moment of ultimate discovery, the pinpointing of the geological nexus where the telluric currents intersected and the Earth's embryonic metallic material was forming, was not accompanied by celebration. It was met with a profound, pervasive silence. Professor Valerius Richter and Tobias Halloway, Standing on the high, isolated plateau where the crystalline pendulum of the Obsidian Compass vibrated in continuous low-frequency resonance, realized simultaneously and without verbal exchange the terrifying and absolute necessity of secrecy. The true nature of the discovery was not that they had found gold, but that they had found the rule book for the formation of all metals. Their meticulously charted maps, filled with lines of calculated resonance and amplitude, were not just geographical data. They were a blueprint for unprecedented, instantaneous industrial power. This was the weight of the secret, a burden of ethical responsibility that transcended the ambition of their philosophical quest. The conflict of purity versus contagion. Richter's quest had always been about purity, the search for the Earth's undisturbed philosophical gold. The gold rush, however, was about contagion, the rapid, violent spread of greedy extraction. Richter envisioned what would happen if his knowledge, the methodology of the Obsidian Compass, fell into the hands of the men currently tearing apart the riverbeds below. The discovery would not lead to careful scientific exploration. It would lead to a catastrophic, immediate mining of the Earth's most vital, deep-seated structural materials. The ability to locate every major metallic deposit with absolute precision would not enrich a few. It would fundamentally destabilize the global economy and, more alarmingly, lead to the geological evisceration of the American West. The quiet rhythm of the Earth itself would be replaced by the deafening roar of industrial machinery aimed directly at its metallic heart. The dilemma was slow, cold, and final. The intellectual purity of the discovery could only be preserved through the destruction of its evidence. To publish the map was to condemn the planet to accelerated exploitation. The methodology of annihilation. The decision to destroy their life's work was not made in panic, but in the quiet, precise contemplation of two men fully aware of the stakes. The act itself became a final ritualistic experiment, the science of undoing. The most valuable object was not the compass itself, but the hundreds of sheets of graph paper that constituted the resonance map. The destruction of the map. The sheets, which contained the intricate coordinates and the numerical data of the telluric currents, were carefully gathered. Richter did not burn them in a single emotional blaze. Instead, he and Halloway tore them into thin strips, then slowly, methodically, placed the paper into an iron pot filled with snowmelt. Over the course of an entire afternoon, using a small, controlled fire, they reduced the pages to a thick, unreadable slurry of ash and water. The process was slow, quiet, and complete, ensuring no fragment of the methodology survived. The elimination of the samples. The crystalline, pre-metallic samples they had extracted from the geological nexus were equally dangerous. They contained the key to understanding the rate of metallic formation. Using the intense heat of a specialized field crucible Richter had carried, they melted the embryonic material down into an inert, unrecognizable slag. This slag was then ground into fine dust and scattered on the high-altitude winds, dispersing the evidence into the geological silence from which it had been drawn. The dismantling of the compass. The Obsidian Compass, the instrument that made the entire discovery possible, was the final artifact. Richter dismantled it with the loving, surgical precision of its maker. The crystalline quartz pendulum was removed and gently crushed between two stones, rendering it useless as a sensor. The obsidian base was then wrapped in rough linen and buried deep beneath a cairn of unidentifiable granite rocks, returning the volcanic material to the Earth's silence. Halloway's final, surviving journal entry, a lone, poignant fragment written in the fading light of the mountain sunset, summarizes the immense sadness of this necessary act. November 4, 1852. The maps are gone. The metal is dust. The compass is buried. We carry the knowledge now only in our minds, where it can cause no harm to the veins. It is the heaviest burden, this memory. The true gold is not found, but guarded. I am now a librarian of silence. The quiet threat. The final compelling reason for the destruction, the immediate spark for their haste, is implied by a near encounter recorded in Richter's fragmented notes discovered much later in Germany. The deep silence of the Sierras was momentarily, chillingly broken by the sound of gunfire. Not the sound of a deer hunt, but the directed, desperate sound of a skirmish, a battle over a new, promising claim many miles below them. This single sound, reaching them in the clear, thin air, provided a stark auditory reminder of the violence and avarice that would consume their knowledge. More concerningly, Richter's notes suggest they were not entirely alone. They had observed, for several days, the quiet, persistent presence of a lone figure, a member of a small, forgotten military reconnaissance unit that occasionally traversed the high passes. This figure, though never approaching, seemed to be observing their smoke, their movements, and their strange devotion to a single spot of barren rock. The risk was not immediate violence, but bureaucratic acquisition. If the U.S. Army, the federal government, or the burgeoning corporation interests of the gold rush learned that two men were meticulously charting the true mineral wealth of the territories, the secret would be seized, classified, and weaponized into commercial gain. The discovery was too large for private ownership. It was a matter of national and global economic fate. Richter and Halloway parted ways in the high mountains, agreeing to dissolve back into the historical record, carrying the weight of the secret in their memory alone. Richter returned to Europe, ostensibly to his academic life, never to publish his definitive California findings. Halloway dissolved into the vast anonymity of the American frontier, becoming a librarian of silence. Their act of destruction was the ultimate sacrifice of the scientific mind. They chose ignorance for the sake of survival. They buried the map to safeguard the Earth, leaving behind only the quiet geological anomaly they had discovered, a final echo of the secret science that was never meant to be read.
The narrative now shifts to the present, searching for the faint, lingering resonance of that buried knowledge. The year is no longer 1852, but the silence of the high Sierra Nevada remains, a geographical constant that transcends human timescales. Yet, the quality of that silence is subtly different. It is now punctuated by the low, continuous hum of sensitive instruments, the modern equivalent of the sub-harmonic drone that first captivated Tobias Halloway. Our narrative, having charted the secrecy and sacrifice of the 19th century, now enters the quiet, analytical world of contemporary research, focusing on the work of Dr. Alastair Finch, the historian who discovered Halloway's journal, who has since dedicated his career not just to history, but to the anomalies of geology. The field of magnetotellurics, MT, a highly specialized branch of geophysics developed well into the 20th century, provides the key to unlocking Richter's secret. MT surveys measure the natural variations in the Earth's electrical and magnetic fields to map the subsurface electrical conductivity of the crust and mantle. The results are complex, data-rich, and entirely devoid of the excitement of the gold rush, perfect for our genre. The modern anomaly, a circular void. Dr. Finch and his team, operating out of a quiet research station miles from any major settlement, began focusing on a specific area of the High Sierras that consistently produced data anomalies in regional MT surveys. This area, located precisely at the coordinates described in the margin of Finch's own discovery, exhibited a profound non-conforming profile. Extreme electrical conductivity. The survey showed a localized, deep-seated structure exhibiting unusually high electrical conductivity, indicating the presence of a massive, connected metallic or highly mineralized body. This was the modern scientific confirmation of Richter's telluric currents. Seismic quietude. Paradoxically, while the area was electrically loud, it was seismically quiet. Standard seismic imaging, which maps the subsurface using sound waves, showed an unexpected void or an area of unusual homogeneity. This suggested a body of rock so perfectly dense and undisturbed that it did not fracture or vibrate as expected, the result of a deep-seated stable core. This was the obsidian echo, the geological silence Halloway had noted in the granite. The geometry.
The anomaly was not random. The conductivity profile mapped onto a precise circular formation deep within the granite batholith, matching the intersection points calculated by Richter a century and a half earlier. The modern instruments, operating on principles Richter had only theorized, confirmed that the high plateau was indeed the site of a unique, large-scale geological nexus, a concentrated area where metallic energy flow reached a peak. It was the Earth's metallic heart, just as Richter had theorized. The convergence of silence. Dr. Finch's work became a slow, quiet convergence of historical and scientific data. He carefully overlaid Richter's fragmented mathematical notations, his 19th century map, with the modern MT resistivity models. The correlation was not just close, it was exact. The point where Richter had recorded his highest 4.2 amplitude sub-harmonic drone readings corresponded precisely with the modern survey's deepest conductivity spike. This convergence was the ultimate scientific vindication of the alchemist of the Sierras. Richter had invented a system of detection years ahead of its time, using only a sensitive crystal and the power of mathematics. His purpose was not disproven by science, it was quietly confirmed by technology. The realization brought a profound sense of historical continuity to Dr. Finch. The chaotic, noisy world of 1852 had dismissed Richter as a fool and Halloway as a failure. Yet their disciplined, quiet observations had survived in the data, manifesting as a persistent anomaly that modern science could only now identify but not fully explain. The pilgrimage and the cairn. Guided by the perfect alignment of the historical and modern maps, Dr. Finch embarked on a quiet pilgrimage to the high plateau. He was not looking for gold, nor for a lost scientific diary, but for the evidence of annihilation. The hike was long, demanding the same patience and fortitude Halloway had adopted. At the site of the geological nexus, Finch found the anticipated surface silence. Barren ground, undisturbed granite, and the constant cold mountain wind. After days of meticulous searching, focusing on subtle shifts in soil composition, he found it. A small, almost anonymous cairn of unidentifiable granite stones built into the rock face. A formation too deliberate to be accidental, yet too modest to be a monument. It was the burial site of the Obsidian Compass. Finch did not disturb the cairn. He merely stood at the exact spot where the pendulum once sang, contemplating the ethical dilemma that had played out on that same barren ground so long ago. He concluded that the true purpose of the compass was not to find, but to protect. Richter and Halloway had successfully buried the methodology of exploitation, leaving behind only the echo, the enduring geological anomaly that proved their knowledge was real, yet remains unusable without their lost key. The legacy of unread knowledge. The enduring resonance of the Obsidian Compass is the persistent gap it creates in our understanding of the American West. The data collected by Dr. Finch proves that a massive, deep-seated metallic resource exists. But thanks to Richter's act of destruction, its precise systematic exploitation remains scientifically impossible. The world knows that the resource is there, thanks to the MT data, but it does not know how to access it efficiently, thanks to the destruction of the resonance map. The legacy of the alchemist of the Sierras is not a fortune, but a quiet, necessary ethical barrier. The knowledge that could have catalyzed catastrophic environmental and economic upheaval was successfully insulated by two dedicated men who chose silence over power. Dr. Finch published his findings not in a popular history book, but in a dense academic journal focused on geomagnetism and historical correlation. The revelation that a 19th century alchemist correctly mapped deep earth conductivity became a slow, quiet conversation among specialized geophysicists, fulfilling the spirit of the Provisional Society from the previous story in its academic isolation. The story ends not with a bang, but with the obsidian echo, the low, continuous hum of the modern MT survey equipment confirming the presence of the Earth's silent, guarded secret. The chaos of the gold rush has faded, but the quiet wisdom of the man who did not see gold remains. a profound, stable force within the fabric of the Sierras. The history remains hidden, protected by the patience of its architects and the complexity of its science, continuing to offer a deep, quiet subject for contemplation.
This long and detailed discussion of American history slowly comes to an end right here. We hope that this quiet narration has helped your mind find rest and has made your sleep even deeper and more comfortable. To listen to another dull yet important chapter from the pages of history on a future night, you may follow the channel. May every one of your nights be tranquil and restful. Good night.